Emily had been married to David for over 6 years, living a life that many envied. They had the perfect house, the perfect car, and a beautiful daughter, Lily. To the world, David was a successful businessman, always traveling for work, making deals, attending conferences, and securing clients across the globe. Emily knew his schedule intimately, and on every trip, she smiled and waved as he left, wishing him safe travels. But over time, her smile had faded and her suspicions grew. The first red flag appeared when David's business trips began to coincide with events he never mentioned before. His trips grew longer, his return dates more vague. Emily had always trusted him, but as the months passed, her doubts started to take root. His phone rang at odd hours, texts became more guarded, and he would often take calls in private. His excuses for being unavailable grew thinner with each passing day. The final straw came when David booked another one of his trips, this time to a high-stakes conference in Berlin. He left with a kiss, a suitcase, and the same story. But Emily wasn't as trusting as she once had been. She had overheard a conversation at a dinner party a week before where David's colleague, Greg, had mentioned a different conference, one that David hadn't mentioned. Her heart raced as she pieced the fragments together. Something was off. Determined to get answers, Emily secretly changed her plans. Instead of staying home with Lily, she packed her bags and headed to the airport, pretending to be a weary traveler herself. She made sure she arrived well in advance of David's expected flight back. Her heart pounded with anticipation and fear. What if she was wrong? What if it was all in her head? When the plane landed, David walked through the terminal with the same confident stride he always had. He was greeted by Emily's cold, steady gaze. She was standing there, in plain sight, her arms crossed, her face a perfect mask of calm. David was startled to see her. He quickly masked his surprise with a smile, brushing it off as though everything was normal. "Emily, what are you doing here?" he asked, feigning innocence. "I could ask you the same question, David," she replied, her voice low but steady. "I thought you were in Berlin." His eyes widened for a split second before he recovered, his mind racing for an explanation. I just got back," he said, glancing around nervously. "I didn't think you would be here." Emily took a deep breath, then smiled slightly, pulling out her phone. She showed him a picture of him, not in Berlin, but in a cafe in Paris, taken just 3 days ago. "It seems you've been busy with other things," she said, her words sharp as a knife. David froze, his face draining of color. His lies had caught up with him, and there was nowhere to hide. The perfect facade he had worked so hard to build was crumbling right before his eyes. His mind raced, looking for a way to salvage his lies, but the truth was out there now, and it could never be taken back. "What do you want me to say?" David asked, his voice suddenly fragile, stripped of its earlier bravado. Emily didn't flinch. "I want you to stop lying, David," she said. "I want you to be honest about where you've been and what you've been doing. Because I deserve that much." David's facade had shattered, leaving only the guilt and fear he had been hiding for so long. The world that had once seemed so perfect now lay in ruins at his feet, and there was no way to undo the damage he had caused. As they walked out of the terminal, Emily's resolve hardened. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: she would never allow herself to be deceived again. The lies were exposed, and David would have to face the consequences. In the days that followed, David tried to spin his usual web of excuses, each more implausible than the last. He claimed his business partner had urged him to join a meeting in Paris, and that the photo in the cafe was just a coincidence. But Emily wasn't buying it anymore. She had seen enough to know that his truth was woven from threads of deceit, each one leading further into a tangled mess. She had no interest in his excuses or his remorse. Every time he spoke, she felt her resolve grow stronger. His lies had become a constant hum in the background of her life, a noise she couldn't ignore any longer. As he tried to apologize, she simply listened, waiting for him to realize the depth of what he had done. It wasn't just the lies about business trips, either. It was the way he had begun to disappear in other aspects of their life, too. The dinners he'd missed, the late nights at the office that turned into weekends away. The intimacy had slowly slipped away, replaced by evasions and silence. Emily had spent too many nights alone, wondering if this was what love had come to. This cold, empty shell of a marriage. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Greg, David's colleague. Emily had never liked the man, but her curiosity was piqued. She opened the message. "We need to talk about David. I'm worried about him," it read. Her heart skipped a beat. The words were strange, a mix of concern and veiled fear. Emily quickly replied, asking what he meant. Greg didn't hesitate to answer. I've known David for years, Greg wrote. But recently, I've seen things I can't ignore. His behavior, it's been off. He's not just lying about trips. There's something else going on, something darker. I think you should know. Emily stared at the message, her fingers trembling as she typed back. What are you saying, Greg? Greg took his time to respond. When the next message came through, it was long, detailed, and unsettling. There's been money missing from the company accounts, Greg revealed. David's been embezzling. He's been covering it up with these fake trips, and I think he's involved in something much bigger. It's all starting to unravel, and I don't think he can keep up the charade much longer. Emily felt a cold wave of shock wash over her. This was beyond anything she had imagined. Her husband, the man she had loved and trusted, was not just a liar, he was a criminal. Everything she thought she knew about him crumbled in that instant, replaced by a new reality, one she wasn't sure how to handle. The next few days were a blur. Emily couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, and now the weight of it seemed even heavier. She knew she had to confront David, but the thought of facing him again, of hearing more lies spill from his lips, made her stomach churn. But Emily wasn't the type to back down. She had waited long enough for the truth, and now that she knew it, she wouldn't let it slip away so easily. That night, she waited for him in their living room, the lights dimmed, her thoughts as dark as the room around her. When David walked in, he froze, sensing the tension immediately. There was no warmth in her eyes, no smile to greet him. I've spoken to Greg, she said, her voice steady and unwavering. And I know everything, David. David's face drained of color as his eyes widened, panic flashing in them. He knew this was the end. Emily, please, he began, his voice cracking. It's not what you think. I was under pressure. There were things I didn't know how to fix. Stop, Emily interrupted, holding up her hand. I'm not asking for your excuses anymore. You've lied to me, manipulated me, and now you've been stealing. I don't know who you are anymore, David. David took a step forward, his face filled with desperation. Emily, I love you. Please, we can work through this. Just give me a chance to explain. You had all the chances, David. And now you've lost me. The finality in her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had never seen her like this before, strong, resolute, and unwavering. She wasn't the woman who had blindly trusted him anymore. She had become someone else, someone who knew her worth. Emily stood up and walked toward the door, her back straight, her heart pounding in her chest. I want you out, she said, her voice as cold as ice. Now. David didn't move, his eyes locked on her, disbelief and guilt pouring from him. But Emily didn't look back. She was done with the lies, done with the manipulation. She would rebuild her life, one truth at a time. As she left the room, her mind was clear. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be pain, there would be moments of doubt, but she would face it all head-on. She had been exposed to the darkness, but she wasn't going to let it consume her. Not anymore. David's lies had come to light, and with them, the person he had tried so hard to hide was revealed. And Emily, for the first time in years, felt free. Weeks passed, and the world that Emily had once known seemed to shatter further with each passing day. As she filed for divorce, her mind was a storm of emotions. Grief, anger, and relief all mixed together. The life she had built with David was now reduced to a collection of broken memories. But even amidst the pain, a sense of clarity began to emerge. David, now fully aware of the consequences of his actions, had gone into full damage control mode. He tried pleading with her at every turn, sending endless texts and calling, hoping for a chance to make things right. But Emily had already made up her mind. His words no longer had the power to sway her. She had spent years letting his lies define her, and now she was reclaiming the power to define herself. Through the process of separation, Emily began to see the subtle ways in which she had allowed David's deceit to shape her. She realized she had been so caught up in the idea of the perfect family, the perfect life, that she had ignored her own needs and desires. She had put her happiness on hold for too long, believing in a fantasy that was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. One afternoon, as she sat in the park with Lily, watching her daughter play, a small spark of hope flickered within her. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She could still find joy in the little things. She could still rebuild. It was a long road ahead, but for the first time, Emily felt a quiet sense of optimism. The weight of the lies was slowly lifting, and she was beginning to breathe again. But the quiet peace she had started to cultivate was soon interrupted. A letter arrived one morning, addressed to Emily in David's familiar handwriting. Hesitantly, she opened it. Inside, there was a single page, his words scrawled in haste. Asterisk Emily, I'm sorry. I've done terrible things that I can never undo. I've been lost for a long time, and I see now that I was using you as a shield from the truth about myself. But the truth is, I've been running from my own mistakes, from my own failures. I hurt you because I was too cowardly to face my own demons. Please, don't let this be the end of everything we built. I still love you. Asterisk, her hand trembled as she read the letter. She didn't know how to respond. A part of her wanted to believe him, to allow him back into her life, to give him the chance to be the man he had once promised to be. But another part of her, the part that had been broken and rebuilt in the wake of his lies, knew better. She had to protect herself. She had to move forward. The decision was harder than she anticipated. The familiar warmth of their past life, even with all its lies, tugged at her heart. But she had already given him so many chances, and each one had been squandered. She couldn't keep going back to the man who had betrayed her trust in the most profound ways. That evening, after tucking Lily into bed, Emily sat alone in the dim light of the living room. She thought of all the moments she had once believed were signs of their love. The vacations, the promises, the quiet moments shared between them. But those moments, like the rest of their marriage, had been illusions. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed David's number for the first time in weeks. The phone rang several times before he answered, his voice soft, filled with hope. Emily, he said, the word full of emotion. I've been waiting for you to call. I'm not calling for reconciliation. David, Emily replied, her voice steady. I'm calling to let you know that I'm moving on. I need to rebuild my life, and that means leaving the past behind, including you. David was silent for a moment, and Emily could hear his breathing on the other end. Please, Emily, he whispered. Don't leave me. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the years they had spent together. I already left you, David, she said softly, and I'm not coming back. The silence stretched between them, and she could almost feel his grief through the phone. It wasn't the apology he had hoped for, but it was the truth. She had to let go, for herself and for Lily. David eventually spoke, his voice breaking. I'm sorry, Emily. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know you're sorry, she said, her voice firm but kind. But I have to forgive myself now. I've let this go on for too long. I have to live for me, not for what I hoped you could be. With that, she ended the call. The following days were filled with legal paperwork, finalizing the divorce, and settling into a new routine. But as the days passed, Emily felt an inner strength she hadn't known she had. There was pain, yes, but there was also a sense of freedom, a freedom she hadn't felt in years. Slowly, she started to rebuild her life. She enrolled in a new course to further her career, something she had always wanted to do but had put off for David's sake. She reconnected with old friends and made new ones. And as she looked at Lily, her heart swelled with love. This was the family she had fought for, one built on trust, honesty, and love. David's presence, once so dominant in her life, had faded into the background. He was a part of her past now, a chapter closed. She no longer felt the pull of his lies, no longer felt trapped in the web of deceit he had woven. She was free. Free to live her truth, free to be the woman she had always been deep down. And as Emily looked toward the future, she felt a quiet but profound peace. She was no longer defined by what had happened to her. She was defined by what she would choose to become. Months had passed since the final words with David, and Emily found herself settling into a life she had never thought possible. The weight of the past was still there, lingering, but it was no longer suffocating her. Every day felt like a small victory, each moment an opportunity to reclaim parts of herself she had lost over the years. It wasn't easy. Some days, the quiet felt too loud, the space around her too empty. But Lily, with her wide-eyed innocence, had a way of making everything seem a little brighter. Emily's world had shifted, and as she picked up the pieces of her broken past, she realized that the love she gave her daughter was a solid foundation, the one thing that could never betray her. One evening, after a long day of work, Emily sat down at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea, the soft glow of the lamp casting a comforting light across the room. She looked at Lily, who was drawing at the table, lost in her world of colors and shapes. "Mom," Lily said suddenly, her voice thoughtful. "Why do you always look sad when you talk about Daddy?" Emily's heart ached at the question, but she didn't hesitate. "It's not that I'm sad, sweetheart," she said gently. "Sometimes people make mistakes. And when that happens, we have to let go of the things that hurt us. But we can always choose to be happy and we can always choose to move forward. Lily nodded, her small brow furrowed in deep thought. I like it when we smile, Mom. Emily smiled, a soft, bittersweet curve of her lips. Me too, baby. Me too. She realized then that despite everything, despite the pain and betrayal, she had built something stronger. Lily had become the anchor in her life. And, just as importantly, Emily was learning to anchor herself. There was so much joy to be found in the small, simple moments. But even with the peace she was creating, the past had a way of creeping up on her when she least expected it. One Thursday afternoon, when Emily picked up Lily from school, a figure she hadn't seen in months stood by the front door. David. He was standing there, a shadow of the man she had known, his face tired and worn. The instant their eyes met, a familiar, deep ache stirred inside Emily. It had been so long since they had been in the same space, and yet, seeing him again felt strangely unreal. Emily, David said, his voice hesitant, almost apologetic. Her heart raced, but she steadied her breath. What are you doing here, David? I need to talk to you, he said, glancing nervously at Lily, who stood beside Emily, eyes wide, unsure of the situation. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I need to make things right. Emily's hand instinctively tightened around Lily's. The child seemed to sense the tension and took a small step back, her eyes wary. David, I don't know what you think you can fix here, Emily replied, her voice calm but firm. I've already made peace with what happened. I've moved on. He seemed to sag, the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. I've been seeing a therapist. Trying to get better. I'm not the same person I was before. Emily felt a pang of sympathy for a fleeting moment, but it quickly passed. She had given him so many chances to change before, each one he squandered. She wasn't about to let him play on her empathy again. You can't change the past, David. And I can't let you keep thinking you have the right to come into our lives and disrupt what we've worked so hard to rebuild. Emily stood a little taller, her gaze unwavering. Lily, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, tugged at Emily's sleeve. Mom, she whispered, looking up at her, her voice soft and unsure. Can we go inside now? Emily knelt down to her daughter's level, her heart full. Yes, sweetheart. We're going inside. David watched them, a silent tear slipping down his cheek. It hurt to see her walk away, but he knew that he had only himself to blame for this distance. Goodbye, Emily, he said quietly, his voice cracked. She didn't respond at first. She just walked into the house with Lily by her side, the door closing softly behind them, cutting the last thread of their connection. There was no bitterness in Emily's heart, just an understanding that this was the final chapter. As they settled back into their home, Emily realized that part of healing wasn't about forgiving the person who wronged you. It was about forgiving yourself for letting them. And in that moment, she knew she was truly free. Time marched on, and Emily's life began to feel lighter. She was growing into the woman she had always been, a woman strong enough to let go of the past and build something new. Her career flourished as she dove into her studies and embraced opportunities she'd once thought were beyond her reach. And, most importantly, she created a new kind of happiness, one rooted in independence and the love she shared with Lily. One evening, as Emily sat on the couch with Lily curled up beside her, reading her favorite bedtime story, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The future was still uncertain, but she didn't fear it anymore. She had learned to walk through life on her own terms. The path ahead might twist and turn, but she knew she was strong enough to face whatever came her way. And as the final words of the story echoed in her mind, Emily smiled softly, knowing that this time, she was writing the next chapter herself. The months passed into years, and the life Emily had rebuilt continued to bloom in ways she never imagined. It wasn't always easy, but she was stronger, more confident, and more at peace with herself than she'd ever been before. She had learned, the hard way, that the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. And she had discovered that sometimes, the truth about who we are is more important than the lies we once told ourselves. Lily had grown, her joy and curiosity for the world around her infectious. Emily watched her daughter flourish, knowing that she had done everything in her power to give her a safe, loving environment. She had learned to love herself more deeply, and in doing so, had given Lily the kind of mother she'd always wanted to be. David was a distant memory, a ghost from a past life. There were moments when Emily wondered if he had truly changed, or if his apologies were just another way to manipulate. But it no longer mattered. She had found peace in her own choices, and that peace had given her the strength to move forward. It was a sunny afternoon when Emily stood in her front yard, watching Lily run through the sprinklers, her laughter echoing in the air. The world felt light again, like the weight of the past had finally been lifted. For the first time in years, Emily felt like she had reached the place she had always longed for, complete and whole, not defined by anyone's actions except her own. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message, and as she glanced down, she saw it was from her old friend Sarah, the one who had supported her through the darkest moments. The message read, "Hey Emily. Just wanted to remind you how far you've come. You're incredible. I hope you never forget that." Emily smiled, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. She had spent so much of her life doubting herself, listening to the whispers of others and believing the lies that had been fed to her. But now, with every step she took, she was building something real. Something unshakable. As she looked up at Lily, now stopping to catch her breath, Emily realized that she hadn't just survived, she had thrived. She had learned to trust again, not in others necessarily, but in herself. The woman standing in front of the future, ready to embrace whatever came next, was someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger on the other side. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across their yard, Emily finally felt whole. The echoes of the past had faded, and in their place, there was only the promise of the future. A future she would create on her terms with no one to hold her back. As the evening settled in, Emily walked inside, holding Lily's hand, the laughter from the garden still lingering in the air. There was no more fear, no more uncertainty. They were free, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The past was done, the future was unwritten, and for the first time in years, she was ready to write the next chapter, one that belonged solely to her. And so, with a deep breath, Emily stepped forward into the light, knowing that she had finally become the woman she was always meant to be. The story wasn't over, but it was hers to tell.